chain smoke and I say fuck a lot. But I accept myself for the way I am. I accept you too. Viewer discretion advised.
This is Dr. Stan here at Radio Liberty. Now, I want to introduce to you Dr. Lawrence Dunnigan. And Dr. Dunnigan is a pediatrician. He practices in the eastern part of the United States, and he's been practicing for 30 years. But some 28 years ago, he heard a fascinating lecture given by Dr. Day, who had been a professor at the medical school he had attended. And this talk was given to a group of young doctors with the proviso that nobody would take notes and nobody would record what was said.
It's been almost 2 years since I first made a video about Dr. Richard L. Day, aka Dr. Dick Day. That was in February of 2021. We're almost in 2023. So if you haven't seen it, I'd advise you to go back and watch it now, or you can watch it after if you want to. I'll leave a link to every platform it's on below. But as days go by, I start to notice more and more of this coming true. Dr. Dunnigan recorded the original tapes in 1988. 3 years later, he had an interview with Randy Engel in 1991. That audio is a little muffled, so I did the best I could to transcribe it. Later on, he also did an interview in 1997. That one sounds pretty good.
Dr. Day was the chairman of the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Pittsburgh from about 1959 through 64, about that period of time. And then he left the University of Pittsburgh and went to fill the position of medical director of Planned Parenthood Federation of America. The Pittsburgh Pediatric Society holds about 4 meetings each year where we have some speakers come in and talk about medical topics relating to pediatrics. And this was our spring meeting. It's always late February or early part of March. This was in March of 1969. And it was held at a restaurant called Lamont, which is
well known in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, a beautiful place. In attendance, I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 people.
Mostly physicians?
Yeah, mostly physicians, if not exclusively physicians. Predominantly pediatricians, but there would be pediatric surgeons and pediatric radiologists, other people who were involved in medical care of children, even though they might not be pediatricians as such.
And the speech was given after a meal, I presume a very nice meal, and everyone was settled down and
quite comfortable
and quite filled and really an ideal state to absorb what was ever coming.
I couldn't find anything linking Dr. Day to Lamont, the restaurant in Pittsburgh, but I did find out that it opened in 1960 and it's still open today. And also, I found a lot of articles that showed Dr. Day would travel around and lecture, and even to the Pittsburgh Pediatric Society in 1957.
We would all become citizens of the world rather than citizens of any one country.
I've even noticed them mentioning soccer a lot lately with the World Cup and all. Check this out.
And along these lines, then, we can talk about sports. Sports in the United States was to be changed in part as a way of de-emphasizing nationalism. Soccer, a worldwide sport, was to be emphasized and pushed in the United States. Soccer is seen as an international sport and would be promoted, and the traditional sport of American baseball would be de-emphasized and possibly eliminated. Eliminated because it might be seen as too American. There was some comment along the same lines about football, and there was something also about the violence in football that met a psychological need that was perceived, and people have a need for this vicarious violence, and so football, for that reason, might be left around to meet that vicarious need. But in any event, soccer was to be the keystone of athletics because it's already a worldwide sport. It's South America and Europe and parts of Asia and the United States should get on the bandwagon. And all this would foster international competition so that we would all become citizens of the world to a greater extent than citizens of our own narrow nations.
Hey, Mr. President, heads up. It's called soccer. Go USA. You guys are going to do it.
Now, you were frantically taking notes all during this lecture on napkins that you had, and so that nobody would really realize you were taking notes because you'd been asked not to, but you sensed that this was important, so you were recording this for posterity at the time.
Yes, and this was worldwide, not just the United States or not just United States, Europe, and so-called Western civilization. But this was to be global, the entire world. Now,
did he tell you who was going to be doing it, or was it just it's going to happen and there's some group behind this?
It's going to happen. He never used a proper noun. He used only one proper noun in the entire presentation. That it was the Rockefeller Institute.
Now, what was the tie of the Rockefeller Institute into this? Now, did he say?
That had to do with research and the treatment of cancer.
And there was something about they had treatments for cancer, but they didn't want to release them because we had to have people dying off. What was that?
Yes, that's just about what it was. That many or most cancers now could be cured. Now, this is back in 1969. Many or most cancers now are curable, but the information has been held in Rockefeller Institute files, because imagine what would happen if people stopped dying of cancer. The next topic is medicine. There would be profound changes in the practice of medicine. Overall, medicine would be much more tightly controlled. The image of the doctor would change. No longer would he be seen as an individual professional in service to individual patients, but the doctor would be gradually recognized as a highly skilled technician, and his job would change. The job is to include things like executions by lethal injection. Euthanasia. Everybody has a right to live only so long. The old are no longer useful. They become a burden. You should be ready to accept death. Most people are. An arbitrary age limit could be established. After all, you have a right to only so many steak dinners, so many orgasms, and so many good pleasures in life. And after you've had enough of them, and you're no longer productive in working and contributing, then you should be ready to step aside for the next generation.
Hello, you've reached the Provincial Health Services Authority telephone line for medical assistance in dying.
The countdown to Joni Cowie's death has begun.
Your call is important to us.
If you call the number on the government website, they will provide doctors that will sign off for you.
Like many disabled Canadians, she is stuck in a cycle of poverty and despair.
It's no hope for anybody in Ontario. That's a good boy.
So she's planning to end her life.
Up.
With the government's help.
They could have me dead in 90 days. That's what I was told.
Amir Farsood has applied for medically assisted dying, known as MAID. He lives in constant agony due to a back injury, but has started the process for end of life because his rooming house is up for sale and he can't find anywhere else to live that he can afford. He barely survives on Ontario disability support payments, which are just over $1,200 a month. He doesn't want to die, but being homeless is not an option.
I know in my present health condition I wouldn't survive it anyway.
Farsood meets the criteria for MAID: physical suffering due to disability that cannot be relieved. His doctor, who knows Farsood's real reason for MAID is his fear of being homeless, signed off on the application in August. Farsood needs a second to do the same. There's a 90-day waiting period. He believes he could potentially access MAID in about a month.
I don't wish to be dead, even with the pain, even with the meds. I still want to be here.
I believe that most Canadians think that this is a service of compassion offered for people who have nothing left to be offered, and they're being offered death as a way out, when in fact the system is being applied so liberally and so easily in such a short time period that people are dying who would have recovered with greater care and resources to live.
Like in my case, the problem is not really the disability, it is the poverty.
Les Landry is in the same position, wanting to live, but seeing no other option than death.
The country's medical assistance in dying, also known as the MAID law, was first enacted in 2016, originally intended for people with serious untreatable conditions such as terminal cancer. However, a new provision will now allow people to apply for euthanasia solely on the basis of a mental disorder.
Right now, just to make things even worse, they're talking about euthanasia for minors, and they're talking about euthanasia for people who are incompetent. And then recently, the Quebec government, the Quebec College of Physicians brought up the issue of infant euthanasia.
Privately owned housing would become a thing of the past. Cost of housing and financing housing would gradually be made so high that most people couldn't afford it. People who already owned their houses would be allowed to keep them, but as years go by, it would be more and more difficult for young people to buy a house. Young people would more and more become renters, particularly in apartments or condominiums. More and more unsold houses would stand vacant. People just couldn't buy them. But the cost of housing would not come down. You'd right away think, well, the vacant house, the price will come down, people will buy it. But there was some statement that to the effect that the price would be held high, even though there was many of them available, so that free marketplaces would not operate. People would not be able to buy these, and gradually more and more of the population would be forced into small apartments which would not accommodate very many children. Then as the number of real homeowners diminished, they would become a minority. There would be no sympathy for them from the majority who dwelled in apartments, and then these homes could be taken by increased taxes or other regulations that would be detrimental to home ownership and would be acceptable to the majority. Ultimately, people would be assigned where they would live, and it would be common to have non-family members living with you. This by way of your not knowing just how far you could trust anybody. This would all be under the control of a central housing authority.
Toward the end of the tape, there was a reference to how this New World Order would be introduced to a population which, at this point, I think they would have assumed would have been more than acceptable to it. How is this put? I mean, we're just going to wake up one morning and the changes will be there, or what did he think about that?
In the winter, and there was importance to the winter, on a weekend, like on a Friday, an announcement would be made that this was in place, or about to be in place.
That the order, the new order.
The New World Order was now the system for the world. Mm-hmm. And we all owe this New World Order our allegiance.
Today is the first full day of the New World Order. Outdoor gatherings are limited to 2 people. Exercise is allowed, but no further than a 10-kilometre radius from your home. Browsing in shops is not permitted. Only 1 person per household may leave to do essential shopping. And from tomorrow, funerals are limited to 10 people.
This is a world pandemic. It's a 1 in 100-year event. So you can expect that we will have transmission from time to time, and that's just the way it is. We've got to accept that this is the New World Order.
What about those who decided they didn't want to go along?
Somewhere in there it was that because this is a new authority and it represents a change then from where your allegiance was presumed to be, people would be called upon to publicly acknowledge their allegiance to this new authority. And this would mean that you had to sign an agreement or in some public way acknowledge that you accepted this, you offered your allegiance to this new authority, you accepted its legitimacy. And there were 2 impressions I carried away if you didn't. And I'm not sure whether the 2 impressions are necessarily mutually exclusive because this wasn't explored in great detail. One of them was that you would simply have nowhere to go. If you don't sign up, then you can't get any electric impulses in your banking account, and you won't have any electric impulses with which to pay your rent or your mortgage or your food. And when your electric impulses are gone, then you have no means of livelihood.
could you get these things from other people, or would that be, in other words, let's say if you had a sympathetic family, I mean, what?
But no, you could not, because the housing authority would keep close tabs on who is inhabiting any domicile, any house, any apartment, any condominium, and so the housing authority would be sure that everybody who lived there was authorized to live there.
So you got to eliminate that compliance, and you make it a mandate, and then you do training, particularly in the city. I'll call them licensing departments, whether it's zoning, buildings, housing will be impacted by it, planning certainly. And you pick the people to run those agencies and the deputies that are pledging allegiance to the New World Order and good governance.
When the new system takes over, people will be expected to sign allegiance to it, indicating they don't have any reservations or holding back to the old system.
I want to be straight with you. There will be no return to the old normal for the foreseeable future. I repeat, there will be no return to the old normal for the foreseeable future.
So people assume we are just going back to the good old world which we had, and everything will be normal again in how we are used to normal, in the old fashion. This is, let's say, fiction. It will not happen.
To lead in shaping a new world order.
One thing also that was mentioned, forests could and if necessary would be leveled or burned. Now this comes out of this overall movement about Goddess Mother Earth and how we have to protect the ecology.
Oh yes, the environmental movement, right.
But the environmental
ostensible movement.
It's all expensive. If we want to get somebody who's trying to get away, we'll burn down the whole forest, we'll find them. That was stated, that deforestation would and could be brought about if necessary to be sure that nobody gets outside the control of the system.
There just won't be any room, he said, for people who won't go along. We can't have such people cluttering up the place, so such people would be taken to special places. And here I don't remember the exact words, but the inference I drew was that at these special places where they were taken, then they would not live very long. He may have said something like disposed of humanely, but I don't remember very precisely, just the impression that the system was not going to support them when they would not go along with the system. That would leave death as the only alternative.
Something else that I had found a couple years ago when I made the original video, but I didn't put it in the video, although I did use a screenshot, I just didn't say anything about it, was that Adolf Hitler's architect, Albert Speer, who was sentenced in Nuremberg to prison for 20 years, well, his daughter, Hilda Speer, came to the U.S. in the 50s, and guess who she lived with? Dr. Day McLean's The Waiting Lights of Spandau, March 15, 1954. Jack Fishman. Margaret Speer changed the subject once more. It was about her daughter, 17-year-old Hilda. She wanted to talk. Last summer, Hilda changed her home in Heidelberg for another in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. She was chosen by the American Board of Re-Education of the U.S. Information Services in Germany as one of a number of pupils to spend 12 months at an American school learning the democratic way of life. The identity of her father was an official secret, and she lived with a Dr. Richard Day, a children's doctor and psychologist. Hilda shares the Day family's home life, attends the local school with Day's 3 daughters, and is a regular speaker at international youth discussion groups. The only people in the locality aware of her background are Day and his wife. Fucking stoned.